Welcome to a special programme from Ipswich at the end of a dramatic and tragic week. The bodies of 5 women, all prostitutes, have been found dumped naked in the Suffolk countryside. Never before have so many murders of this kind been committed in so short a space of time. And whoever's responsible is still out there. He's left precious few clues as to his identity, and the police desperately need a breakthrough. Are the police getting any closer to catching him? And what drives women to sell themselves on such dangerous streets at night?
On the 2nd of November 2006, we went public around a girl called Tanya Nicol that went missing on the night of the 30th of October 2006. There were obvious concerns given the fact that Tanya was a street worker in Ipswich, and on the 15th of November, literally a couple of weeks after Tanya was reported missing, a second girl, Gemma Adams, was reported as missing. It was a dog walker in the Hintersham area, walking past the stream, reported the body that we now know to be Gemma. We then put police divers through the stream, working all the way downstream. It's how we found Tanya's body. Third body was Annalie Alderton, and she was found in an area of woodland in Nacton. And then the remaining 2 girls were found in wooded area, very, very close proximity in Leventon. It was challenging, to say the very least, the speed at which this was occurring. As we know, in the end, 5 girls haven't gone missing, 5 girls haven't been found dead. Immense pressure on Suffolk and Stabbury and us as individuals, senior investigating officers, to catch the killer, really.
Believe it or not, my first ever customer was Steve Wright. I'd been walking up and down the streets and seen by police. At that time, soliciting was illegal. Still is, obviously, but I'd been seen walking away with a male. The police officers didn't know where I went, but had seen me return with said male, and we got pulled over by the police. I was cautioned for soliciting, and obviously this male's details were taken, etc, etc. And then when it came out that Steve Wright was actually the man guilty of these murders, due to the Freedom of Information Act, they had a look into his previous or prior convictions, cautions, etc. for curb crawling, and it turned out that he was done for curb crawling with me. So yeah, my first ever client was Steve Wright.
It wasn't until the 19th of December that we arrested Steve Wright, and he was charged a couple of days after that. The main evidence was DNA links to all 3 land-based girls. Once the DNA for Steve Wright came in, we were able then to quickly build a picture up of who he was, what his vehicle was, and as I say, then the pieces of the jigsaw fell into place. The evidence of the girls on Steve Wright's clothing, evidence of the girls in Steve Wright's house, in his vehicle. We knew also that his vehicle was in the right areas at the right times on the nights of those girls' disappearance. All 5 were stripped of any clothing. We believe that Gemma's body was probably thrown into the stream. Remaining bodies were literally discarded by the roadside. Certainly Annalie Alderton and Annette Nichols were feet from the road, quite visible to passing traffic.
The last time I saw Annette was probably one of the best moments of my life. Cut a long story short, yeah, I'd had a very good client the night before. I had 400 quid. She'd had a good night. She had a couple hundred quid. So that night we got our drugs and we went and sat down by the Orwell Bridge on a place called The Strand, just in a lay-by right next to the riverside. And for the whole night we sat crying, talking, emotionally distressed, vulnerable women, talking about our children, our family, our lives, how we don't like being drug addicts and how we want to change, and our hopes and dreams. And yeah, after talking to her, all night and crying all night, the sun rose that morning, and it was the best sunrise I've ever had in my life. after a night of pain and torment in my head and crying, the sun rose in the car and it was like warm, beautiful, shone in our car and kind of lit up all the sorrow that was in the car that we'd been feeling all night, you know, and it kind of let all that pain away. And for one day, we weren't working girls, we weren't drug addicts, you know. We were Jade in the net, messing about in a river, getting absolutely muddy and filthy and dirty, you know, which was cool. You know, and I'll never forget that. I'll never forget that. My net. Well, it's not my net, but I love her. Bless her.
Well, obviously following the murder investigation, which was probably the biggest, most traumatic issue that had affected Suffolk and Ipswich in its history, a group of very senior leaders got together across Suffolk to determine how we would address the problems. One of the activities coming from that group was to remove prostitution from the streets of Ipswich. Our emphasis was actually to put the criminal sanctions, move it from the women, who we now knew were incredibly vulnerable, to the men who, in my view, were exploiting and abusing these women. And certainly we know what Steve Wright did. And you know, because the women who were working on the streets were often subject to violence, to robbery, to rape, finding it very difficult to report these things to the police at that time. So we needed to recognise their vulnerability and recognise that actually a lot of them were out there having been coerced or forced, if you like, to do what they were doing in order to fulfil a drug addiction.
One of the biggest positive changes was the declassification of being classed as a criminal. You know, when I was soliciting, I'd get 3 cautions. Every time after my 3 cautions, I'd then get arrested. If I got arrested, I would then go to court the next day. I would then get fined for soliciting and prostitution. You give me £200 fine, I've then got to go out on the streets again the next night because you're expecting me to pay this money back.
The aims of the strategy, certainly about developing routes out of prostitution, was acknowledging that drug addiction was a huge part of it. It was the sole driver in many cases of why women were there in the first place. So we acknowledged that there was a real need to provide drug rehabilitation services for a lot of these women, and that was probably one of the key drivers within the strategy, was working with the drug and alcohol team and working with the voluntary sector like Iceni, who have fantastic services to help people beat drug addiction.
There are a number of issues when it comes to us helping these women, what we call safely exit prostitution. A huge amount of issues. And in my 30 years of working in addiction, I truly believe these were the most difficult cohort of individuals I've ever worked with. If I say they were badly bruised by society, that would be an understatement. Out of the 32 women we work with regularly, 16 came from the corporate care system. So they were in care homes. And it's so evident in a lot of them women that they hadn't experienced love. The abuse that they suffer physically, sexually and mentally is huge. So it's not going to be an overnight thing with these women. First of all, getting them engaged into a treatment program was hard enough, but we'd already sown the seeds, if you like, in late 2006 and early 2007. And I would say it took about 4 years on average to help these people to where most of them are now, because you've got to deal with so much abuse and neglect, and least of all, a lot of them had lost friends.
Iceni, only the best drug treatment agency in the world. It was Iceni that did the nitty-gritty. It was Iceni that were there in the darkest moments. It was Iceni that were there to, I mean, I grew up on occasions, you know, in Iceni. You know, there's Brian Tobin. He is such a happy, festive fella. You know, it doesn't matter how bad you are feeling, you can go in Iceni and, you know, Brian just cheers you up anyway. He's always got a joke. But Iceni were there, you know, to save the lives of these women. You know, the organisations were there to point us in the right direction, but Iceni were the ones saving us. I believe, in my heart anyway. You know, they saved me. You know, they were the family that were helping these girls, really, in all fairness. You know, it wasn't just a materialistic side. You know, I needed someone to be there in my depths of despair, and that was Iceni and the staff at Iceni.
Jade's done brilliant. She's still with us. Many drug addicts won't make it. Yeah, I'm proud of Jade. She has worked hard through her demons. And none of us could ever grasp some of the things that, not just Jade, but most of the women we work with had been through as children and or young adults. We would never comprehend that. And we as a society, when we have 15, 16, 17-year-old prostitutes, criminals, drug addicts, who's the victim here? How did we as a society allow that to happen? Because you're not born bad. I don't believe you're born bad. But somehow, and then it's easy to blame them, 15-year-old drug addict or prostitute. How did we allow that to happen?
It shouldn't have taken a serial killer to kill some people for them to realise that's somebody's daughter, or for them to change their perception on drug addicts. You know, these were 5 lovely women, you know, who unfortunately had a drug problem. You know, that's all it was. You know, they're not out there for any other reason than for drugs, you know. And it shouldn't take murders of 5 women for any kind of person to change their perceived idea of what a prostitute is. You know, we're all women, we're all in some form of despair, or we're all vulnerable adults, you know. With the strategies that were put in place, not only was my life saved and I'm able to recover, but Ipswich itself, the red light district itself, was able to recover. What was a dark, down, really horrible part of Ipswich town, it was regenerated. The girls, we may not have been regenerated, but we certainly could be reborn again into a life of recovery. I never lived before, never smelled the roses. I'm living now.